Britain moves forward from this? Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. Well, it was the Trump trial last night. Tonight, I'm going to be asking, is this a witch hunt, or is he really in serious trouble? We go to Nottingham, where a vigil has taken place after those horrendous murders yesterday. We don't yet know whether the police really will class this as terrorism or mental illness. We'll find out more. And a Conservative Member of Parliament is going absolutely crackers at the Home Secretary, asking why, oh why, did 50% of Albanians that crossed the Channel last year, why were they given asylum status? All of that in just a moment, but first, let's get the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you. Good evening. A vigil has been held for the victims of yesterday's attacks in Nottingham. Thousands of students and staff attended the ceremony this afternoon, held in the grounds of the University of Nottingham, following the deaths of 19-year-old Grace O'Malley-Kumar and Barnaby Webber. School caretaker Ian Coates was the third person police named as being fatally stabbed yesterday. His van had been stolen and then used to target others. Well, at the vigil, parents of both teenagers shared how much university life and friendships in Nottingham had meant to both Grace and Barney.
I know Barney will be super touched by everyone that's here, and he loved it. He loved it here. He couldn't wait to come back. Drove me mad, but his heart will be with you guys forever. Look after each other. It's the big thing, is that look after your friends and look after people around you.
And then, in another extraordinary development today, detectives are now investigating CCTV footage of a man who appears to match the description of the Nottingham attack suspect attempting to break into the window of a residential care home. The incident wasn't reported to police at the time, and no residents were hurt. A 31-year-old man with a history of violence is still being questioned by police. GB News spoke to Jason Derbyshire, a resident from that care home. He was an eyewitness to what happened.
In the curtains, and there was just some guy stood under this archway, all dressed in black, got a black rucksack, black beanie hat on, just staring at the edges over there. Gone back in my room, had a wash. 30 seconds later, there's really loud banging, trying to get through that window. I didn't see the security guard come out, but apparently he did. The guy asked him, is it a hospital or a hostel? He went, no, it's a hostel. And then he just came back through this archway and just walked off there, dead calm. So yeah, it's horrendous. Absolutely horrendous. How someone can do that, I don't know. I really don't know.
Meanwhile, a Home Office minister has today said the government will provide more legal routes for refugees to enter the UK. Lord Murray of Blidworth says new routes could be implemented as soon as the end of next year. That's after more than 9,000 people crossed the English Channel in small boats so far this year. News on the economy now, and stronger trade at bars, pubs and shops has helped the economy return to growth in the UK. The latest figures show it did expand by 0.2% in April, and that's recovering from a 0.3% fall the previous month. The Office for National Statistics saying the positive impact of improved hospitality and retail spending was offset by industrial action hitting other sectors. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and on the TuneIn app. This is GB News. Back now to Farage.
Good evening. What happened last night in a courtroom in Miami is, when you think about it, truly extraordinary. the 45th President of the United States, was held in custody and faced this document. This is the indictment that was put before him yesterday. There are 37 charges, 31 of them under the Espionage Act. And what I want to try and drill into today is, has Trump made mistakes? Has he made some serious, careless errors? Or are these things that former presidents just tend to do? But the real question is this simply a witch hunt? Is this an attempt to stop the front runner to become the Republican nominee? And remember, he's now 40 points ahead of Ron DeSantis in the opinion polls amongst Republican voters. Is this simply a witch hunt? And I'd love to get your thoughts on whether this is or is not a witch hunt. Please let me know your views. Farage@gbnews.com. Well, first I want to get some political reaction. I'm going to go to New York. I'm going to speak to the former famous mayor of New York, Rudy Giuliani, and of course a man whose career was as a lawyer. Rudy, good evening. Thank you for coming back on the show. I want to ask you something.
Always great to be with you, Nigel.
Thank you. From what I understand, when they went to Joe Biden's house, they found a whole load of classified documents going right back for many, many years, not just from when he was, the vice president, but also from when he was a senator. Also, I understand that Mike Pence had documents. What is it that Trump has done that is worse, and let alone Hillary Clinton and Maserva? What is it Trump has done that is worse than everybody else?
Actually, on the spectrum, Trump has done the least. So when this special prosecutor, who's not very special actually, announced that everyone should be treated according to the same laws, I thought he was announcing that he was going to dismiss the Trump case, because the Hillary Clinton case involved 33,000 documents, which she destroyed. Trump's case involves a little over 100, none of which were destroyed, been preserved, none of which have even been compromised. They've never been out of Mar-a-Lago, and there's no suggestion they were in the hands of any enemy. So this whole espionage thing is totally fictitious. There's no spying going on here. This is a question if he kept them in the right spot or not, under a civil statute called the Presidential Records Act, where a president debates with the archivist as to whose papers are they.
Yeah.
And every president has gone through this, and every president has done, I would say, if I can recall correctly, I go back to Reagan, at least as much, if not more, in terms of confusing papers. Now, let me make the point. None of it got out of Mar-a-Lago, and none of it was even possibly in the hands of a hostile power. In the case of Biden, he took the documents out 15 years ago, 18 years ago, when he was a senator. Senators have no right to take these documents. Presidents do. Just taking the documents was a felony for Biden. Now he started taking them out as vice president, and he has them all over the city. But he has them in places where the Chinese can easily get their hands on them. How about he has some in Chinatown?
I mean, Rudy, from this side of the pond, and around the Western world, what we're seeing is Donald Trump facing civil cases, facing criminal cases. Goodness knows what's to come in Georgia. Let me ask you a simple question. I think I know the answer, but do you believe this is simply a witch hunt?
Yeah. We're copying Venezuela, Cuba, the former Soviet Union. The party in power has taken over dictatorial powers, and they are trying to convict the only person they're sure can beat them. They know he can beat them because in every poll taken right now, he beats the Republicans by 40 and he beats the Democrats by 10. So I'm not speculating about that, Nigel. The public opinion polls show if you took the election today, he'd win by 10 points.
Yeah.
And 10 points is too much. They got to get him down to at least 5 or 4 so they can cheat. 10 points is a little bit too much for cheating. This is very, very dangerous for the Democratic Party. And a lot rides on this. They've been cheating and committing crimes for years. They're all going to go to jail if they lose.
Well, Rudy, we'll see about that. But as this develops, we're going to come back to you over the next few weeks. And thank you for being Rudy Giuliani. Thank you. Well, let's get into some of the detail of this. I'm very pleased to be joined in the studio by Mark Brnovich, former federal prosecutor and two-time Attorney General of Arizona. Mark, good evening.
Always a pleasure, Nigel.
Well, Rudy, of course, a staunch defender of the president. And let's declare a hand. You are a friend of Donald Trump's, but also with your legal hat on. When you look through this document, what is in here is pretty serious. So serious. And Trump outlined it last night. Let's see Donald Trump speaking after the court hearing back in New Jersey yesterday.
Threatening me with 400 years in prison for possessing my own presidential papers, which just about every other president has done, is one of the most outrageous and vicious legal theories ever put forward in an American court of law. I will appoint a real special prosecutor to go after the most corrupt president in the history of the United States of America, Joe Biden, and the entire Biden crime family. Name a special prosecutor.
OK, Donald Trump, very clearly, he's facing up to 400 years in prison with these charges. From the beginning, what's clear is that Trump was a magpie, a collector of everything. Box after box of photographs, of documents, of dinner. I'm sure the Buckingham Palace invitations were in the pile. And he collected everything, including which were a whole load of papers of issues that he dealt with. So that bit we know. And we know that a lot of boxes were transferred to Mar-a-Lago. That bit is easy. The question is, what was classified? What was authorized? Was he just too lazy about all of this?
Well, Nigel, let me just begin by saying one thing and making it absolutely clear. President Trump's mistake wasn't collecting all this information, as you said, or these documents. It was not endorsing me in a Senate primary when I was running for the Senate. So just so you know, it's not like I'm, here to carry his water. But as a former federal prosecutor, a couple things really stuck out at me. As Rudy mentioned, you've mentioned that all former presidents have a bunch of documents, and they're classified, and then they go through this process.
They write their memoirs. And
not only that, any president can declassify anything they want. And so the president has a lot of authority to actually have these documents and declassify these documents.
I understand that. The president has the power to declassify the documents. My question, again, is, was he just too lazy? Did he declassify these documents or didn't he? Because it's very unclear to me. Yeah,
well, and that's part of this is going to what's going to have to come out is the defense. Exactly what he did, when he did it. But the reality is look, I mean, in the Western world, we talk about the rule of law. We talk about consistency, equal application of the law. And the reality is that what President Trump did when these charges related to handling the documents and obstruction of justice, I mean, you have Hillary Clinton literally destroying servers and documents.
And this is the charge. This is the charge that on her own private server, there were tens of thousands of documents.
Right.
And when she was hauled over the coals, the accusation is that she cleared the documents before giving the laptop to the FBI, which raises a question. 2016 campaign, I was there in some of the crowds, lock her up, lock her up. But Trump never prosecuted her, did he?
Yeah, no, he didn't. And, look, I mean, a lot of times there's politicians say something, right? The old saying that politicians' lips are moving, they must be lying kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I wasn't trying to be dodgy with your question, but I keep coming back to, in a lot of ways, it doesn't matter whether those documents were classified or unclassified, because we know former presidents retain those documents, they have them. We know that other people have those documents. And one thing that I keep thinking of is a former president, President Trump still has Secret Service protection. Hillary Clinton didn't when she was destroying the server and she was running for president. Joe Biden in his haphazard garage, that wasn't being protected by U.S. law enforcement officials. And so, in many ways...
But the accusation here, and photographs appeared in the press over the weekend, even before the court case, which I thought was interesting, of documents in the ballroom at Mar-a-Lago, documents in a bathroom at Mar-a-Lago. I mean, the accusation is that Trump had this stuff laying around all over the place. I find it hard to believe, but that's what they're saying.
Yeah, well, and once again, I was a federal prosecutor, I was a state prosecutor. I do not recall ever in my career ever seeing an indictment with actual photographs. And I think that that's designed to poison the jury pool, inflame the public, get all these media stories out there. So this indictment, we've got a copy of it, was, I think, largely written for public consumption. And that's why there's some of those juicy anecdotes in there. And I'm sure there's some prosecutors and left-leaning, Praetorian Guard, FBI agents that were sitting around laughing, going, aha, we're going to use Trump's very own statements from the campaign trail against him. But the notion that you put these photographs in there, that is not necessary.
I did find that, and the fact that it went to the press over the weekend. One of the things this document does say is that there were 6 documents marked top secret that the prosecution claim had not been declassified, and we'll find out more as this develops. But the biggest accusation here, I think, or one of the biggest, is that he showed these documents to people who visited him at Mar-a-Lago saying this is secret. And that's why they're claiming, under the Espionage Act, he's shown people papers that involved American defense, American nuclear capability. It's a very serious charge.
Right, and once again, to put this in context, when that conversation allegedly occurred, we weren't there. We don't know if he just waved a piece of paper. And ironically, if they're going to use President Trump's language from speeches and everything else, we know that he is given to exaggerate sometimes and a little hyperbole.
Really?
And so, yes. So how do we know exactly, what he held, what he had, what he showed them, what he didn't show them? But remember, to be convicted, and there's 31 counts of this, Nigel. Each one of those counts carries, double-digit years in prison. So you have to have an unauthorized possession. So if I were his defense attorney, I'd be like, no, he was the former president. There hadn't been a subpoena yet for these documents. He was authorized to have them. So the elements of that crime are, you have to have an unauthorized possession of them. You have to have reason to believe that those documents could injure the United States or help a foreign adversary, and that you're willfully, essentially intentionally not delivering them. And so those are various elements you have to prove.
This is where the obstruction comes in. Because again, what the prosecution say is when Biden was pulled up on this, when Pence was pulled up on this, they willingly surrendered the documents. And that and this is what they say, that when Trump was pulled up on this, he surrendered some of the documents, but not all. So how do you disprove obstruction?
Yeah, and this actually, I think, is the most serious of all the charges, quite frankly, because in the past, the federal government, when they want to get you, they usually go with lying to the FBI or obstruction of justice. And so I think this is an issue that the Trump defense team is really going to have to address, because I do think this is one where they're going to have to explain what they did, why they did it, and maybe he thought he turned everything over. I don't know. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he genuinely believed all these were declassified and he didn't need to turn anything else over. So I don't know what his defenses are going to be, but at some point there will have to be some explanation.
No, there will.
That is probably the most serious, toughest of the charges for me, point of view of a prosecutor. I will say, though, once again, this is what bothers me from a federal prosecutor. I think we are seeing the weaponization, and Rudy mentioned the fact that in third world countries this happens, and the reality is that they were supposedly investigating, what documents were turned over, not documents turned over, and you end up with these process crimes. Well, maybe you weren't truthful to the FBI, or maybe this happened, and once you start down that path, it is very easy for them, whenever the next party's in power, to do that. And so I think that we are seeing the beginning of an erosion of public confidence.
So the precedent's quite worrying in that sense.
Well, I think that Joe Biden should be worried, yes, because this is...
And Trump's already called it,
right, the Pandora's box. But, once again, as a prosecutor ethically, so this is, if I were part of his defense team, one is the way this was filed and with the photographs, I think it's borderline unethical what the prosecutors were doing with pretrial publicity and trying to, poison the jury pool. But the other part about it is that you're in this situation now where DOJ, when I was a prosecutor, we believed in what was called the rule of lenity. And that meant that if you were going to criminally charge someone for a crime, you construe criminal statutes narrowly and really, quite frankly, in favor of the defendant, because you have the power of the state. You have the power literally to destroy people's lives, take away their property, their liberty. And so that's an awesome responsibility. You should never, whether it's President Trump, President Biden, whoever it is, no one should ever be in a position where they're worried about their liberty because some prosecutor is throwing stuff against the wall, untested theories, something that's never been done in the United States.
This raises huge questions. Now, ultimately, this will go before a jury.
Yes.
In Florida. Yeah. How's it going to end?
I think it is going to be tough to convince 12 jurors in South Florida, especially people, there's a large Cuban American population down there that saw firsthand, Venezuelan population that saw firsthand when you get a dictatorship or a government that weaponizes the Justice Department, weaponizes prosecutors, and federal law enforcement ends up becoming an arm of the Democratic Party. I think there are going to be a lot of people that are going to be resistant to that. And remember, United States, it has to be a unanimous jury.
Yeah.
So everyone has to agree. So all you need is one or two holdouts. And,
it's going to be interesting. Mark Bernovich, thank you for being with me. And, you know, I've done my best here to present the most serious charges of the prosecution and to get some answers and explanations. Is it a witch hunt? You bet your life it's a witch hunt. All he has to say is, I'm not running for president, and all these cases would simply disappear. But he's bigger and tougher than that, in my view. In a moment, we go back to Nottingham to talk about those appalling murders yesterday. Were they terrorist offences? We'll find out more in just a moment.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I asked you, is this a witch hunt against President Trump? Some of your answers coming in. One viewer says, nope, nobody should be above the law. Well, that's true, but the law should be applied evenly. Ryan says, this is not just a witch hunt, it's an example of political corruption. The deep state are terrified of Trump returning to the White House. You bet your life they are. And Leslie says, of course, it's a witch hunt. They've been trying to hound him out since he won the election. They hate him because he doesn't toe the line and puts the US first. Well, you're quite right. One thing you must never do is put your own country first. That would be awful and upset your international partners. Now, we covered those horrific murders that took place in the early hours of yesterday morning in Nottingham. And this evening, there has been a vigil. And let's just remind ourselves, Barnaby Webber, Grace Ameli Kumar and Ian Coates, they were the three people that were murdered. And these are two of the parents speaking at the vigil just a couple of hours ago. It's actually quite difficult to watch.
I know Barney will be super touched by everyone that's here. And he loved it. He loved it here. He couldn't wait to come back. Drove me mad. But his heart will be with you guys forever.
Look after each other. It's the big thing. Is that look after your friends and look after people around you.
Well, think for the poor parents and think for all those around the three people that were murdered so horribly. I'm going back to Nottingham right now to join Mark White, GB News' Home and Security Editor. And Mark, we've learned a little bit more about what actually took place last night, or the night before, sorry, haven't we?
Yes, Nigel, as we speak, there are active door-to-door inquiries here at a fifth crime scene now. We were aware, of course, of those four crime scenes, Ilkeston Road, where the 19-year-old students Barney Webber and Grace O'Malley Kumar were stabbed to death. Magdala Road, where 65-year-old Ian Coates was stabbed to death. Milton Street, of course, where that van stolen from Ian Coates was used to run down three members of the public. And then further up from Milton Street, about half a mile further up, the point where that van was stopped and the prime suspect arrested. Well, now this is the fifth location, a residential complex for vulnerable homeless people, where residents were wakened at about 5 in the morning by the sound of banging on the windows of that complex, and this man dressed in black trying to get in to the window of one of the rooms there. Resident punched out at this man and he backed off at that point. It was only later that the managers in this residential complex realised that he could be connected to the terrible incidents from earlier that morning, and they contacted the police, and yes, indeed, the police have now linked it. I spoke a little earlier to Jason Derbyshire, a resident here who saw the events unfold, very emotional because he had just really realised how close he and his fellow residents had come to being victims themselves. Knowing what you know now in terms of what's happened, how's that left you feeling?
Scared.
Because without a doubt, people that are here are people with complex needs and quite vulnerable people.
Yeah, they are. Like I say, I've not been here long. Had a marriage breakdown, but this is like a culture shock to me. Really is.
I know, Jason, must be very emotional for you. I can see that because, you know, you've been caught right in the middle of the most horrific of events that you just didn't even know about.
No, of course not. I knew St Anne was bad, but not that bad. You don't expect that on your doorstep, do you? And like I say, when it happened, I didn't even know what he'd done when he'd gone down the road. It's horrendous.
Nigel, as for the suspect here, we're told that he is not cooperating with the detectives trying to piece together the exact sequence of events and trying to establish a motive. At this stage, the Home Secretary confirming that she has not been able to rule out a terrorist motive. That's why counter-terrorism detectives are still lending support to Nottinghamshire police. As for the suspect, we told you last night that he is a West African migrant. We now know that he came to the UK more than a decade ago. We believe that he was living here lawfully, that he has a history of some violent episodes and some mental health concerns. But there is we understand, no criminal record, but still some questions to be asked about this issue and this propensity towards violence and mental health problems. Were the authorities alerted to that, Nigel?
Help me. If he has a history of violence, how could there be no criminal record? It doesn't add up to me.
Well, it's always possible. People do have a history of violence, and perhaps police investigate but don't prosecute. Perhaps police prosecute, but that prosecution was not successful. Perhaps the violence doesn't cross the threshold. The complainer might withdraw the complaint. There's all kinds of reasons why someone can have a history of violence potentially, but it's not gone as far as a prosecution and a criminal record.
Well, Mark, thank you again. Great reporting from Nottingham. From what I can see, the police here have dropped the ball. I have been shouting into this camera, why are so many Albanians being allowed to stay when Germany and 8 other countries wouldn't give one single Albanian refugee status? Well, I'm very pleased to say that Marco Longhi, Conservative Member of Parliament for Dudley, is now speaking out on this issue. He joins me in just a moment.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions, and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio, and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Well, for all the world, you'd have thought that the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, that she was really the hard hitter when it came to immigration. She was really the toughie in all of this. And, of course, she's called terrible things in the left-wing media and by many members of the House of Lords. But Marco Longhi, Conservative Member of Parliament for Dudley North, he thinks the Home Secretary actually is a bit of a softie. And, Marco, you said it was a disgrace that 50% of the young Albanian males that came last year were given asylum.
That's correct, and this is one of the things that the Labour MPs like to accuse us of when we are perhaps giving some tough messages on asylum. They keep saying, oh, well, you've accepted so many, and I'm saying, well, that is because the criteria we are using to accept them are the wrong ones. If you look at France, Italy, Germany, 0%.
Yes.
that is what
and
we
France,
should be doing.
France about 12% or so. But many other countries, zero. About 9 countries in Europe say zero.
Exactly.
Because it's a safe country. It's an EU applicant member. It's a holiday destination. It has relatively stable government. So what's going on? Is this a tough Home Secretary who, just to clear the backlog, is saying let them all in?
Well, I would have a real issue with that. So the solution for me for clearing the backlog is to remove everybody who is here illegally. It isn't just to simply start accepting people as being lawfully here. That is not what the British people voted for. They voted for Brexit because we wanted to take back control of our borders, our laws. What's happening, I would believe, is that we need to take back control of the civil service first before we do that.
OK, because you see, it's interesting, isn't it? Priti Patel was her predecessor, and I don't doubt for a minute the sincerity of either of those women.
Correct.
Yet they were unable to fulfil their roles successfully. And I wonder whether this was actually because higher up in the Conservative Party there wasn't the will to do it. But you're hinting here at the civil service. What do you mean?
I think there's an issue to do with political will, but it's a political will perhaps not to do things that might be unpleasant, because the Conservative Party is a very broad church, isn't it? It's one of the things that has been a success for it in the past, but it also means that there are weaknesses because there are very polarised views on certain things, and you can see that playing out right now. So in terms of actually what we do next, this is an issue for me, is taking back control of the civil service. They are now saying that if they don't, if they see us insisting that we implement the Rwanda plan, they're going to go on strike. This is just incredible. But surely that's against the Civil Service Code. It has to be, and I've been very clear about this. If they do that, there is no question they should be resigning or we should be sacking them.
Who's tough enough in your government to do that?
Well, this is an issue. They'll start
no.
saying,
The truth is, nobody.
You could well be right. I don't know.
Well, I love the honesty. At least I love the honesty. We've just gone through 9,000 people that have crossed the English Channel so far this year. I was out of a channel myself on Monday. I was so enraged by the Sunak spin last Monday, Monday week back, suggesting, oh, the crossings are 20% down. We've got it under control. We haven't, have we?
Well, it certainly doesn't feel that way, and I think it'll only start feeling that way once a lot of the people who are already here illegally start to be removed, because at the moment we have problems with housing supply, we have overstretched public services, and of course all of these people here need to live somewhere. They need public services, they need housing, they need schools for children, etc.
I mean, the pressure's huge. I mean, 616 on Sunday, 545 on Monday, 204 yesterday. Bit puffy in the channel this morning. We're seeing clips now of Dover this morning. Just one boat in today. I've looked at the forecast for next week. There'll be huge numbers coming again next week. Marco, thanks for your honesty about the, the lack of guts in the party. Final thought, Boris Johnson, you know, your seat that you won, you know, a classic sort of Red Waller type seat, a Brexity seat, and sure, Jeremy Corbyn had a bit to do with it. You know, people, sort of patriotic Brits thought this guy supported the IRA, or rightly or wrongly, that's what many of them thought. But Boris was that big cheerleader to help get people like you into the Commons. Has he gone for good?
That is very difficult to say. One of the things I've learned from the past 3.5 years is that tomorrow can be a very different day. Anything can happen. I really would not like to say. One of the things is for certain, Dudley certainly loved Boris. They still love him, but I will always be loyal to any Conservative Party leader. I want the Conservative Party to do well. If that happens, fine. What happens with Boris in the future, who is to say?
So you'd support the Conservative Party leader even if you disagree with their policies?
Well, that will always be the case when you come into politics. You have to have a position where you draw a line. So you're always having that constant friction between... There's always that tussle.
You see, if we had proportional representation, you could actually support parties that you believed in. and the broad church conservatism would be gone, wouldn't it?
That could be one of the things that could happen. As you probably know, I do not support proportional representation because I have experienced it firsthand. I have lived for nearly 20 years in Italy, and you've had as many governments in Italy as you've had years since the Second World War. It means that much smaller parties do, in fact, hold the balance of power.
Depending where you set the bar. Depending where you set the bar.
That could be.
I mean, I was told that first past the post gave a strong and stable government. It's given us 5 years of a coalition with the Lib Dems and 7 years of chaos. Marco Longhi, it's a pleasure to have you in the studio. And well done for speaking out on this Albanian outrage, because that is exactly what I believe that it is. What the Farage? Smart meters. I've warned you again and again on this show, don't allow them to fit a smart meter. It is their way of managing demand. It's their way of cutting you off if they want to. Well, now we learn that 3 million of the smart meters have faults. Yes, and that in over 150,000 cases through smart meters where people have been slightly late paying their bills, people are then automatically, without debate, without comment, put on pre-payment tariffs. Don't get a smart meter. Ignore the electricity company, ignore the government, ignore it all. Don't get a smart meter. Bud Light, yes, the most popular beer in America. And you remember that advert with Dylan Mulvaney, yes, the transgender advertiser for Bud Light. And Bud Light drinkers said, you know what? We just want to buy a beer. We're not interested in political messaging about trans rights. But I'm very, very pleased to say that Bud Light is no longer the best-selling beer in the United States. A brand called Modelo has taken over. You've heard it before, but it's dead true. Go woke, go broke. And finally, the Ashes, and you all know I'm a cricket nut. Very interesting piece of polling suggesting that unless in big open offices there are Sky Sports screens so that people can keep in touch with what's going on in the cricket, there's an estimate that if the Ashes are close and as we go into the 4th and 5th tests, up to 13% of the workforce in some offices will be taking days off sick. And I know about this because I could well be one of them. And we wish Stokesy and the boys all the very best. And Moeen Ali, who today collected his OBE at the Palace, and it was his OBE for retiring from Test cricket, has been dragged back, and it's going to be a very exciting summer of cricket. In a moment, we have to return to the Schofield case because Dame Carolyn McCall has been before the DCMS committee today with one or two, I think, pretty startling revelations. And whether you care about Schofield or not, the fact is, this is a very, very important organisation. ITV has been part of our national life for 70 years. It does have a role as a public service broadcaster, and it is a public company. Who knows? Maybe some of your pension fund is invested in ITV. We'll talk about Dame Carolyn McCall's appearance this morning and what it said, or perhaps what it didn't say, in just a moment.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point. But
And action.
Sergeant, we've been greeted by superstar panel that are already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News. Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Fridays from 8, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, Dame Carolyn McCall, the ITV boss, this morning was there in front of the DCMS Parliamentary Committee, and some of her answers were really quite revealing. This question was put to her by Dame Caroline Danage.
Chair, can I please just say it was not an investigation? I wouldn't qualify this as an investigation. I think this was a review. It was an ongoing review that every time there were periods of intense speculation, we went in and asked more questions, but it was an ongoing review.
Well, that's a funny old answer, isn't it? Well, joining me is the man who, of course, has been following every single millisecond of this over the last few weeks. Of course, it's GB News' own Dan Wootton. So, what do we make of Dame Carolyn McCall's performance at the committee? And that very bizarre. I mean, was it investigated? Wasn't it investigated? Is it, Dan, that Philip Schofield is just too big and too important to be put under scrutiny?
Well, potentially. I mean, look, as we always say, the cover-up was worse than the crime. Yep. I absolutely think that is the case here, Nigel. Why on earth did they release a statement saying that they investigated the matter? I mean, that was a statement she would have had to approve because the whole focus of the media was on the broadcaster at that point. Then today, when questioned about it in front of MPs, as you say, oh, no, there was no investigation, don't be stupid, there was just a review. She also said she only first became aware of the rumours of Philip Schofield and this young runner when he came out on air. Remember that in February 2020?
Just as I've said to you before, you know, I'm not in the show busy end of the market, but I knew it was going on.
Everyone knew. And look, the reason I know that she knew is because I'd told her man, her right-hand man, back in November that this was going on.
When you were there.
Yeah, exactly. Well, just after I had left, in part because ITV was trying to muzzle the Sun when it came to running these stories about Philip Schofield, where I was executive editor at the time. So it's a complicated story. And the problem is, you know, a lot of the MPs, they're not really aware of the timeline. So I think she was able today to get away with quite a lot.
And it matters, and I was saying this before the break, it matters because ITV is a public service broadcaster, it's a public quoted company. Hey, I was on GMB this morning with Susanna Reid. You know, it does matter. It's played a big role in our national life. Where does ITV go from here?
Well, I think they've got big problems now. So, share price down 60% since Carolyn McCall joined. Ratings plummeting, trust plummeting. And do you know one of the revelations that came out today from John Nicholson? He's an SNP MP, but look, he's an ex-broadcaster, worked at ITV News. He's a Rottweiler too. He'd done his research. He'd spoken to a lot of ITV whistleblowers. And do you know what they refer to their audience at ITV this morning in production meetings? Tower block Tracy's, which is obviously completely derogatory. Now, McCall looked horrified and said, oh, I've never heard of that. We wouldn't want that sort of audience anyway. But I think that's the problem. It's the snaring metropolitan elite.
Yeah, actually, I've heard MPs and MEPs talk about their constituents in very derogatory terms, and, oh, we told them this and we didn't mean it and wasn't it funny? It's a London problem, isn't it?
It is. And, you know, this is the Champagne, Coffee, North London set. They think the same. Remember, there are real political implications for what Carolyn McCall did. She's mates with Meghan Markle, and if you don't think in the same sanctimonious, lefty way that they do, woke way, we might say, you're gone from that channel. Jeremy Clarkson, Piers Morgan, Jeremy Kyle, Eamon Holmes, Carol McGiffin, all out the door. And that matters. But look, I think ITV Today has lost its crown as the people's channel, the working class channel, and that's great news for us.
Well, and I haven't said this so far this week, but I'm going to say it now, that GB News is 2 years old this very week. And Dan, you were here on the you were broadcasting on the first night.
You were with me.
I was around and I was with you on the show, and I came in as a presenter a month later when it's fair to say the channel was having a few little local difficulties. We're doing okay, aren't we?
Yeah, look, I do sense this change. I really do. I mean, we said 2 years ago, didn't we, on that opening night, people are looking for an alternative. Yeah. And back then, a lot of it was because of the COVID narrative. Well, I'm sorry, we've been proven right on that, Nigel. You were always against these lockdowns. I was very concerned about the forced vaccination and those mandates.
I remember you had Carol Sikora on your show right from the very start.
Yeah, Lord Sumption, he was my first guest. So, and you know, my first digest was actually opposing lockdowns. And look, I know a lot of people think that issue has moved on, and it has, but the point is people are craving an alternative. Look at the Nottingham story last night. I actually purposefully, Nigel, briefly switched off from Jubes & Co last night because I wanted to see how ITV News covered the Nottingham story. There was a conspiracy of silence on that broadcast. You know, the presenters didn't even ask the reporter who did this.
Mark White did a brilliant job yesterday. Brilliant job. So what have we got on the Wotton show tonight?
Well, look, we've got an ITV special, and do you remember Jason Gardner? He was one of the big judges on Dancing on Ice and also a star of This Morning. He is furious with what ITV have had to say today. He is speaking out live in his first exclusive TV interview, plus Carol McGiffin, Jim Davidson and Christine Hamilton. So we've got a lot on this. Lee Anderson, though, too. Lots of politics, not just
We love Lee Anderson. Jim Davidson's an old mate. It's going to be great. Dan, thank you so much. We've got time for a couple of Barrage the Farages. And the first one comes from Sally from Weymouth.
Hello, Nigel. My name's Sally and I'm from Weymouth. My question to you is the people of Weymouth and Portland are desperate. We don't want the barge here. We need to have someone to listen to our voices. Who can we turn to who is going to help us?
Well, Sally, I have spoken to Richard Drax, your local Member of Parliament, who I know very, very well. He's absolutely beside himself because you're going to have 500 young men in that port on the barge, and, of course, they're going to be free to walk around the whole of Weymouth. They will have spending money in their pockets, 3 square meals a day, and he's very, very worried about the impact on Weymouth, which, of course, in the summer relies very much on tourism for its income. Now, one of Rishi Sunak's boasts the other day is that he's got 2 more barges, but the trouble is, with what's come in since Sunday, you'd need 3 barges just to house them. Your feeling, Sally, of utter helplessness, I'm afraid is shared by increasingly large numbers of people all around the country. And I honestly can't offer you a solution. I wish I could. I honestly can't. All I can tell you is I started off in the early months of 2020 saying this was going to become a major problem. And I regret to say that I was right. What you can do, I've just got no idea. You can protest, you can try. Sometimes these things get moved elsewhere, but the problem is going to grow as the weeks and months go on. One more I've got time for. Portia from Dorset has a question for me.
Hi Nigel, I'm Portia and I'd just like to ask you about what you think of a private company like Portland Port making such a huge decision for the local community without even consulting us first.
Portia, local communities don't matter anymore, local democracy doesn't matter anymore, MPs don't matter anymore, it's all completely out of our hands. It's the Home Office who subcontract to a variety of private companies, many of whom make vast hundreds of millions every year from this illegal migrant scandal. It is a complete and utter racket. It is a disgrace. And we've seen in Ireland, you know, people out on the streets protesting. It's amazing how sanguine many British people have been over this, but it is wrong, wrong, wrong. Well, coming up in a moment, It is, of course, State of the Nation with Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg. We have to keep saying sir, and we have to sort of, bow and sort of pretend we're sort of back in good feudal times. Jacob, good evening.
Good evening.
What have we got tonight?
What have we got tonight? Well, we've got Paul Staines on of Guido Fawkes.
Oh, fantastic.
With this extraordinary story, which you touched on, about one of the members of the committee judging Boris actually being a lockdown party himself. Try and find out, is that really true? Can that be true?
Oh, yes.
And can,
yes.
Can it be? You think it can? Bernard's a good chap, so we hope that it's not.
Bernard Jenkins, this is what
Bernard Jenkins, that's right. But if this is true, it's really important, and I think makes the process look very unfair. If you've had somebody sitting in judgment who actually has been found to break the rules, that is significant.
Let he who is without sin
cast the first stone, judge not that ye be not judged. We're not going to have a gospel quotation competition, but we're also going to be talking about the economy with Liam Halligan, because we've had this news that interest rates on government debt are now higher than they were when Liz Truss was Prime Minister, and then it was all a disaster.
Yes.
And now it's all fine.
Yes. Well, of course it was a disaster because Liz Truss wanted to break the power of the corporates and help the individual and bring down taxes. That would never do. No. The IMF could never approve that. Well, before all of that, let's have a look at the weather.
Hello, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. It's been another stunning day across the whole of the UK today. Clear skies for most, continuing overnight and into tomorrow. Staying warm both by day and by night with high pressure to the north of the UK. We've still got this cooler easterly airflow affecting eastern parts, but it's a relatively dry airflow, so cloud-free skies for the vast majority. Having said that, odd shower possible as we go into the evening for northwest Scotland, perhaps even a rumble of thunder. They'll clear away. Some mistiness hanging around for the north of Scotland around the coast. Some low cloud developing across central parts of England. But otherwise, it's clear skies for the vast majority. And despite those clear skies, it's going to stay warm overnight. Temperatures lingering in the teens. So in some spots, particularly city centres in the south, it's going to be an uncomfortable one for sleeping, I think. But we'll start off with sunny skies once again on Thursday morning, and although some clouds will bubble up because we're going to see a bit more instability in the atmosphere, a bit more humidity arriving, nevertheless plenty of sunny spells and temperatures once more reaching the mid to high 20s, the hot spot likely across central and southern parts of England, but still widely temperatures well above average, except for that east coast once again. However, some storms will form over the Republic of Ireland, and into the evening they'll likely push into parts of Northern Ireland, especially towards the west. And these could be pretty vicious with torrential rain, frequent lightning and large hail. So it could cause some impacts for parts of Northern Ireland late afternoon into the evening. They clear away overnight, and then